All right, good morning, everybody. It's good to see everyone. I appreciate your time again today. I'd like to call our Southern Nevada Strategic Infrastructure Development Working Group meeting to order. Jeanette, will you please establish quorum?
Absolutely. This is Jeanette Hogan for the record, and I'll call the roll. Chris Sanchez.
Here.
Dave Johnson.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. Doa Ross.
Here.
Jeff Bricker.
Here.
Okay. Justin Brown.
Here. Good morning.
Good morning. Terry Sheridan. Okay. Derek Armstrong. Bill Arndt.
Here.
Okay. Rafi Festakajan. Okay. Maisha Williams.
Good morning, present.
Good morning. Okay. Shawnee Coleman.
Good morning, I'm here.
Good morning. Jonas Peterson.
Good morning. I'm here.
Good morning. Thank you. James Chrisley.
Good morning. I'm here.
Good morning. Bo Bernard. Okay. Victor Way.
Yes. Good morning. I'm here.
Good morning. Derek Hill. MJ Maynard. David Swallow.
I'm here.
Thank you. Chancellor Melody Rose. Okay. David Bobzian. Jennifer Taylor.
Good morning, I'm here.
Good morning. Thank you. Oh, I see Bo Bernard, you just logged on. I will mark you as present.
Present.
Thank you. Dr. Federico Zaragoza. Okay. Let's see, Sandra Rosenberg. Oh, I have a note here. She will be late signing on, as well as Constance Brooks. I will mark them present later on. Okay. Dr. Kumar Acharya.
Here.
Okay. Bart Patterson.
Present.
Thank you. All right, I will mark the following absent: Terry Sheridan, Derek Armstrong, Rafi Festakajan, Chancellor Melody Rose, David Bobzian, and Chris, we have quorum.
Thank you, Jeanette. Appreciate that. Moving on to item 2, public comment. Jeanette, would you please facilitate public comment? Thank you.
Absolutely. Does anyone wish to give public comment at this time? You will be limited to 3 minutes. Okay, and we also didn't receive any written public comment either. Chris, no public comment at this time.
All right. Thank you, Jeanette. Moving on to item number 3, approval of the April 29th minutes. Are there any edits or changes to the April meeting minutes? All right, looks like we don't see any hands or anything. All right, seeing none, do we have a motion to approve the minutes as written?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as written.
Thank you, Jennifer. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right, thank you. Who was that?
Sorry, Dave Swallow.
Thanks, Dave. All right. So all those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, any abstentions? Okay. All right, great. Moving on to item number 5, chair comments. So first I want to thank everybody for their participation in getting the group to this stage. We're on our, sorry, my children are home from school and it sounds like one's crying in the background, so I do apologize. School ended yesterday, so now we're having Zoom calls with kids. So I just want to thank everybody again for their participation. We've got a lot of information that's come out of this process and a lot of dialogue that's occurred because of it. And so I really do believe it's been a tremendous value add to GoEd and our work, and I'm sure as we move forward with our technical group with John Restrepo and his team for our final report and recommendations, there'll be a lot of value add for everyone that's participated. And so one of the things, as everybody knows, we are in the final hours of our legislative session. And because of that, we have a number of folks on today's working group, both participants in the panel as well as members, that their schedules are extremely tight today. So I did not prepare any prepared remarks because I wanted to be very brief to allow for dialogue to occur during the panel. So I will move on to item number 5 and get right to the working group discussion. So, sorry, my little one in the background here. So with that, so our panel discussion today is on infrastructure finance, new approaches, and the Nevada State Infrastructure Bank background and application. We're going to do this a little bit out of order today, in that we're fortunate to have our treasurer, Zach Conine, to talk about the State Infrastructure Bank. And I know Zach's been just really busy with the session, and so I'd like to, Zach, have you jump in, and then what we'll do when you're commenced your remarks, we'll have Andrew and Roy do introductions as well. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Chris. Hi, everybody. I'm Zach Conine. In case I haven't met you, I happen to be your treasurer currently. So nice to meet you. The governor proposed funding for the first time the State Infrastructure Bank in his State of the State address back in January. We started working on how we could take the infrastructure bank off the shelf and do something with it back in 2019, soon after we were elected. But it went from being a nice thing to have and something that we thought could be an opportunity to an absolute necessity due to the pandemic. So first, let's go back to 2017. In 2017, legislature passed an infrastructure bank bill primarily focused on transportation, done in preparation for the infrastructure week that never came. And that idea, like many good state government ideas, ended up in a binder on a shelf somewhere and was probably, no one did anything with it. So when we came in, we started looking at ways we could potentially fund it, specifically focusing on outside capital and ways that we could get investors into the state from an infrastructure perspective. One of the opportunities that we've seen in the fixed income market in the last couple of years is there's a fair amount of what I would call stranded capital, capital that can't be invested in equities because of pension funds and their requirements around portfolio composition, but also capital that's in money market funds getting a couple of bips overnight, right? So there's capital that needs to go into fixed income, but there aren't enough fixed income vessels for it. And some of that capital is specifically interested in infrastructure projects because of the returns provided and also the jobs created. So we started working through what the infrastructure bank could look like, and that's coming through in two legislative actions. One is the CIP, which got through Assembly Ways and Means this morning. We're creating a $75 million seed fund from general obligation bonds of the state that will go to seed projects into the infrastructure bank. We're also using the Bond Interest and Redemption Fund, or BIRF, to pay for the executive director and other staff until the bank gets spun up. We were able to do that, of course, because our state has a really high credit rating, which we were able to maintain through the pandemic, and that led our office to be able to generate an additional $100 million in bonding capacity compared to last biennium at the same time. So the other piece is Senate Bill 430, the Infrastructure Bank Bill, which has made its way through the Senate and has had a hearing in Assembly Ways and Means, where we expect it will be processed hopefully relatively soon, but we all know how the legislative process goes. That bill effectively takes the Infrastructure Bank bill from 2017 and modernizes it to match the current expectations of infrastructure spend and, frankly, the White House's expectations of infrastructure spend. So it adds some categories to it. They include rural broadband and 5G connectivity, recycling and sustainability, renewable energy projects. It keeps all the transportation projects that were originally in there, and something called social infrastructure, which includes schools, hospitals, and affordable housing. And then there's a broader comment around other projects as necessary to aid in economic development. It also adds a few people to the board, specifically the director of the Governor's Office of Energy, hello David, as well as 2 governor's appointees. And the intention there is to really make sure that we've got experts on the board, which also includes myself, the head of business and industry, the head of GoEd, the head of transportation, and those governor's appointees, to make sure that we've got experts there. But we also know that there's other people who are going to have to be at the table. For instance, the Office of Science and Innovation Technologies, or OSIT, who's kind of the state experts in broadband, right? We're going to need to bring on people from the housing division, which is part of B&I, to have conversations about affordable housing. We're also going to need to bring in stakeholders from the community, because any bank that is effective, one of its big purposes is to coordinate between the state and local governments. And that means coordinating with not just people who work for the local governments, but the people who rely on them for services. And so the bank, in its best case, does 2 things. One, it coordinates and plans, right? And we know this group probably more than most, that every time we have a downturn, the first people to go are the planners, which leaves us flat-footed when the recovery money shows up. We certainly dealt with that in ARA, trying to figure out what exactly to do. We missed out on some opportunities where projects were put forward by, say, 2 cities that happened to be near each other, that were competitive as opposed to complementary. We think we can avoid some of that through additional communication through the infrastructure bank. The second thing is leveraging of capital. So in addition to that $75 million of general obligation bonds, which of course are constitutionally controlled as to what we can use them for, we're going to go out and raise capital from pension funds and other sources. And we're going to be the recipient of hundreds of millions of dollars from the American Rescue Plan and potentially billions of dollars through the American Jobs Plan, depending on what version ends up getting through. The goal there, again, is to coordinate at the state level to make sure that capital projects, as they're being paid for, right, are complementary and are creating as many jobs as humanly possible. To that end, after the bill passes, knock on wood, we'll put together the board. The board will put together bylaws. Part of that bylaw process is creating a rubric wherein we'll quantitatively be able to evaluate projects, giving weights to things like the number of jobs created per dollar invested, how quickly those jobs would be created, how sustainable that business is, and any other secondary or tertiary impacts from that work. Also, and I guess I should mention this, it is a bank. So the intention is to loan money and receive money back in the form of principal and interest payments, which then go through to either investors or the state, depending on what source of capital we're using on a specific project. So I'll stop there. Happy to take any questions. I do apologize. Ways and Means is going right now, so we're going to have to bounce off in just a bit, but happy to take any questions for a few minutes. And then, of course, we're always available. It's, you know, we're your treasury. We work for you all. So give us a ring. Chris?
Thank you. Appreciate that. Any questions from the group? All right. Thank you, Zach. I appreciate it. I know you've got a crazy schedule today, and if we have any, we'll follow up with you. Any questions come up?
Absolutely. And we're going to need to come back to this group as we start setting up bylaws, because we're going to want all of your input to make sure that we get it right. It's good to see everybody. Thanks for your work on this. Have a great day.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Okay, moving to our 2 panelists. We have Andrew Young, Transportation Industry Consultant at Linby Consulting, and Roy Lauder, Managing Director of eRail International. Andrew, I think what I'll do is start with you and have you do a brief introduction and talk a little bit about what you do, and then we'll go to Roy to do the same, and then we'll dive right into discussion.
Absolutely. So good morning, everyone. Andrew Young, I'm Linby Consulting, and myself are both based in Dallas in Texas. And my background is really in transportation, a whole career there. And I tend to be a transport expert, helping various consulting firms with their programs and concepts. One of the companies that I've been working with the last year or so is eRail and Roy, and this is particularly interesting for me because it's a really creative kind of funding mechanism for transportation projects, plus all others as well. So I must say, although don't sound like I'm from Texas, I'm based out of Dallas, and obviously I'm originally from the UK. So that's who I am. I'll let Roy introduce himself and say a little bit more about eRail.
Okay, thanks very much, Andrew. Good morning, everybody. A little bit of background about myself. I'm the Managing Director for eRail International, and my background is I've been in infrastructure for about 30 odd years, from oil rigs to railways to power stations, and now back again to rail. So what we're looking at doing, and I don't know if you got to see a little bit of a white paper that we sent out in advance, but essentially what E-Rail does is provide a funding tool for rail projects, particularly passenger rail, but freight can be done as well. The background to that, maybe a little bit of a background to E-Rail itself, was about some 15 years ago. The company was formed by a successful property surveyor in Edinburgh, Scotland, and the former transport director for Edinburgh City Council, who recognised that there was an opportunity to introduce a method to try and get over a long-term problem of how do you fund projects, transit projects, that invariably the city could not afford to do. And the property surveyor, John McGregor, recognised that in many cases there would be property values increasing where the stations were being built, and therefore the landowners would be very keen to see this infrastructure be built. And it seemed logical, therefore, that if indeed the city had a gap fund, a funding gap, then we might be able to partially fill that gap by going to the landowners who were going to be beneficiaries as a result of this infrastructure. And that's really where the concept of contributory land value capture came from. And we started developing projects. We did initially one with Edinburgh City Council some 15 years ago, and have been refining and fine-tuning the model throughout the UK, and have now started rolling out our methodology to Australia, Canada, United States. So that's kind of where we are with land value capture. And we think it's a particularly valuable financial tool for states, for counties, for cities who are eager to put some transit in, which helps economic development, often is the catalyst to economic development, but find that they've got a funding gap. And the dilemma invariably in these cases is that the project gets shelved, therefore the economic development is delayed, and the landowners don't get any benefit. So there's the dilemma. I'm going to go back to you, Chris, just to see if you've got some questions perhaps that you want to probe out more from us.
Sure, I've got a few to kick us off, and just to remind the working group, please, if anybody has any questions, feel free to chime in anytime. And I apologize, I can't see everybody's face on the screen here, so please speak up. I may not notice if you put a hand up or something in the window. So can you go into, Roy, a little bit more background in terms of some of the examples that you mentioned briefly in the UK, how municipal governments have approached this? What's the starting point? What's the kind of the starting point for a municipal government? And just to remind you, we have a number of representatives from our local municipal governments as well as the county here on the working group. Great.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much. Well, we're currently at the moment in negotiation, and we're in negotiation with about 20 projects in the UK, and we are undertaking about 8 at the moment. So to give you an idea of how that process starts, it's a discussion with typically the transportation department of a state or a city who've got plans, infrastructure plans that they desperately wish to get to work. And what we explain to them is, look, there could be some substantial sums of money raised as a result of them installing new infrastructure, transit infrastructure particularly. And you must remember, this is all because the land values around stops or stations always tend to rise. For example, let me take a more rural example. If a farmer has land that's valued at about $5,000 an acre, and a train station is built nearby his land, say within a kilometre of his land, that area close to the station could increase in value to in the order of $1 million an acre. So you've got substantial increases in land value in these specific zones. And often enough, cities and states and such like do not capture any of that efficiently enough. There are three broad types of land value capture that are running around at the moment. The most well-known one is taxation-based land value capture, which is used widely throughout the United States and North America, and is being talked about in Australia and the UK. The truth of the matter is that the taxation focus tends not to be very effective. It requires upfront payment by the landowners. It comes at a point where they're fairly sure that the project's going to go ahead. They're somewhat resistant to participate in paying a lot of tax, and usually the tax gain's quite limited, and often the development is limited as a result. So the other two methods, one is a municipal land value capture, which is generally where the municipality, city or state owns the land and therefore is able to develop it at its cost and sell the land on to developers, and that way they make the money that can then repay infrastructure or build infrastructure. That of course only works where you own all the land along the route. And then there's our methodology, which is contributory land value capture, where we negotiate with the landowners on behalf of our client, which is always a municipal body, a city or a state or a province. And we negotiate with the landowners to contribute a part of the windfall that they're going to make to enable this project to proceed. So this is how we do this, is we carry out an initial survey on behalf of our client to identify what the potential land value uplift could be along a proposed route. And the trick is to do this as early as possible at the early stages when the engineers are checking the geological, the geological survey on the route, the environmental impact surveys. All these early stages is also the time when they want to be doing a land value capture study. There has to be doubt about the project going ahead. Otherwise, you will not get any contributory land value offered by the owners, because if they believe that this is definitely going to happen, they will naturally sit back and wait to get all of it themselves. So there needs to be doubt, and there needs to be a sense that they can make this happen. So the stage one survey is to find out on behalf of the city or the region, look, here's where the potential is, and it's in these areas. Now, this can help in deciding what particular way to take the route. It might go A to B via C or A to B via D, and one route might offer greater financial return to the city. The second stage then is to agree on a particular route and where the particular stations might go. And then we go and negotiate with the landowners around those sites. Now, we can do more than, in no way do we wish to constrain the transport department in their selection of sites or the planning department in their decision on what planning will be provided, but we work in liaison with them sympathetically to find out what are they likely to allow to happen on these particular sites. And once we secure these contribution agreements, that's held in trust for the city. I'm using the city as an example here, for the city until the infrastructure is built and the land values start to rise. And it's when these land values are capitalized in increased value. So for example, the farmer does sell his land to a developer and he's made over $1 million per acre, then suddenly there's a great deal more money. Now, that contribution agreement will have agreed that he is going to contribute a percentage of that to the fund, and then that fund money is released to the client by us, because we look after the fund while it's in a sense hypothetical. but these are legal agreements, so there is no great difficulty in securing that capital. But the important thing is the landowner is not at risk. If the infrastructure is not built, he is not liable to pay anything. So he's not being asked to put his hand in his pocket until he's already made a lot of money. Does that help, Chris?
Yeah, thank you. And was there another? I heard something. Was there any questions from anybody before I ask the next? So one of the things, there's 2 points that come to mind. One was fund availability and when that occurs, but also just to pull back for a second, both Andrew and Roy, coming out of the pandemic and what are you seeing in terms of emerging trends in infrastructure from where the both of you sit with your broad experience post-pandemic that the group ought to be thinking about?
Yeah, interesting. We're seeing worldwide a huge investment in infrastructure across all the developed world. So Australia, Canada, UK, Europe, and United States, all central governments are investing a great deal of money to try and kickstart their economies and grow into the 21st century. There's a recognition that infrastructure has been left to degrade in almost all developed nations, and this is an opportunity to reinvest. Of course, there's limited budgets, and there's always there's always a wish list of projects far greater than the budgets will sustain. So this is a race about how to get your projects ahead of competing projects. Is kind of the trend we're seeing worldwide.
Yeah, and maybe I can just add to that, Roy, as well. I mean, it's interesting, and from a US perspective, we are, I mean, with the current administration, but I think also predating that within a lot of municipalities, there's a recognition that developing transit infrastructure actually is a greater economic contributor than has really been considered before. In the Dallas-Fort Worth area, which obviously is a really growing conurbation metro area, there is at least 4 kind of light rail and metro and heavy rail projects, which have actually all gone ahead on the basis of the economic development uplift. These are schemes which all of them are actually all funded through the traditional tax raising approach. We have kind of latterly come back and said, you know, would land value capture be an alternative to look at in the future, as that's certainly a more palatable way of looking at these programs and these projects. The reason why we suggested that is that they have the evidence already. They have the data which shows how developing some urban links, providing stations, particularly with connectivity, and enable people to kind of go between modes, particularly park and ride, has actually significantly increased land values and then developed the local economy. Number of examples in the part of North Texas where I am around that. So I think that is a trend which will continue. And as you know, Roy said, there's a focus in infrastructure. I think people just see that as the highways maybe and the large kind of capital projects, which are probably overdue. But I think if we look at passenger transit and transportation, there does definitely seem to be an appetite and evidence for that being a good use of funds.
Yeah, I think the other driver there as well is probably the commitment towards climate change measures and environmental measures. We're seeing quite a lot of pressure on countries trying to reduce their carbon emissions through transit, as well as energy and other solutions. So we're seeing passenger transit projects being brought in to try and remove these single occupancy vehicle journeys quite around the world. So that's another driver that tends to get approval for a project from central government. Is what we're hearing from clients.
I have a question, Chris.
Sure, go for it.
Bart Patterson at Nevada State College. We'd love to have light rail come out to the college from downtown someday. But one of the big issues that they had when they were exploring light rail was not so much where the stations are located. And I totally understand the property value increases there, but could you comment a little bit more, property owners' perception that their property actually goes down in value along the line? That's where I'm not as clear on what the value proposition is there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There is no great value provided by having a rail line just whizzing right past your garden. And the land value increases around the stops or the stations. So there's not much can be done around that. I don't know what sort of compensations or if anything is done around landowners who are not affected by it. Can't really give you a better answer, really. I mean, that's not the part that we work on. It's only the areas where the stops go that we try and capture the value. Trying to get approval for a project and getting voting approval from the citizens of the city has to be our client's role really there.
Chris, I have a question. This is Bill Arndt, City of Las Vegas. Actually, a comment and a question. The comment is just to disclose for the committee and the group, the City of Las Vegas does have a contract with Axios Nevada LLC, which is a group led by Tom Skanke to study this very thing along Charleston Boulevard within the city's jurisdiction. So wanted to disclose that for the group. The question is, with alternate modes of transportation out there, such as the Boring Company, and where is private funding headed? Is it headed towards funding solutions like traditional light rail, or is it looking at alternate modes of transportation, such as the Boring Company's solution or other technologies that are out there?
Do you want me to try and answer that? I can't necessarily give you a very full answer to that, other than we tend to see that a lot of the private funding is following more traditional and secure methodologies. They're less inclined, at least the bulk of the finances, tending to follow conservative routes rather than new technology. So in that sense, light rail projects and such like are deemed as safe investments. I'm not quite sure about the new technology you mentioned there, so I can't really put that into perspective.
So, sorry, there's some feedback. Was there another question? Okay. So, Roy, just one of the last questions I have is on the risk. So, can you address some of the risk factors with this new approach?
Yeah. Essentially, there's very minimal risk given the potentially very large upside. So, the advantage of contributory land value capture is you can be securing something on the order of 30% of the capital cost of the project. Light rail projects can vary from $300 million to $1.5 billion of the sort of ranges we're seeing. And therefore, these are non-trivial sums if you can capture 30% of that in contributory agreements. The risks, of course, are whether, in fact, politically you can get the project through. So a little bit back to the earlier point about whether the routes are going to be accepted. that's the case with any project, of course. There's obviously the risk about the risk to the landowners is whether planning permission would be given to their plans. And again, we don't interfere with that. We have the sanctity of the planning departments is absolute here, and therefore we don't interfere at all with their views of what will be allowed or not. It is worth pointing out, however, that there are no examples of railway stations that we're aware of in the world where development has not taken place. And it would not be likely that the planning department and the transport department would locate a station somewhere that planning didn't want anything to happen. So we don't see that as a significant risk. As I say, the risk of raising the money is rather dependent on whether the overall project can get approval. I think it's important to point out that this is more of akin to a mortgage repayment scheme than an upfront payment scheme. So land value capture, as I understand it, mainly in the United States, has gone the taxation route, which is where they try and take the money upfront. But they only get a very small percentage. So in general terms, it's around about 5% of the capital value of the project. So it's much smaller. Where you're going to get the 30% is where, and sometimes it can be considerably more than that. We tend to give a range of 20 to 70%. Where you're going to get that is you've got this longer term development, much bigger developments being allowed. And it takes a while for that to all come to fruition. The developers are very eager; they're being supported. The city's keen to have the development occur, so these can be out of town routes, new suburbs being developed. So the risk really is dependent really on the pace at which you can absorb development, and sometimes it can't all happen straight away. So there's a little bit of delay to that. Again, it's not a big risk. And of course, the repayment terms, which I think possibly Zach would be able to talk about there, you can favor relatively reasonable repayment terms with federal or other funding bodies. That we try and make these contribution agreements last for 20 years. So it's that this avoids landowners wriggling out and not developing anything until they get off with till their agreement is lapsed. Most developers in our experience are very eager to seek planning permission and get on with it as soon as they possibly can. So most of the uplift starts between 1 to 2 years after the infrastructure is being built and about 10 years on. So you're getting this significant slug of repayment capital in that period in the main. That is largely where the risks lie. I'd say the risk of using land value or contributory land value capture is very small indeed, and with enormous uplift for the client. I wonder if it's worth sharing with you a little illustration. I don't know if we can do that, but I have a little illustration that I thought I would share, which just demonstrates it. I was just going to see if I might need some help to share. Jeanette, is that something you can help me do?
Yes, I'm happy to share. If you want to just shoot me the document really quickly, I can display it on my side.
All right. I can't just throw it up on my screen now.
You do have that option. I've made you the presenter, so you can, at the bottom of your toolbar, you should see a share button.
Yeah. I do.
And then just go ahead and click it.
Okay, I've done that.
And it gives you a couple options if you want to. There we go.
Okay. Right. There we go. Can you see that?
It's still loading from my end. Let's give it another second.
All right.
It says that you're starting to share the content. Have you clicked on what window you'd like to display?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. Oh, we see it now.
Good. Okay, great. Okay, so this is an illustration of reality. This is Toronto City. And if you look at the graphic on the bottom right, what you're seeing is how along 3 stations, Toronto Downtown, Finch and Richmond, you've got high-rise development.
Hey, Roy, are you able to zoom in on that by chance?
Dash. I'm not sure I can get any bigger on that. Let's see.
Okay.
Did it? Sorry, I'm not going to be able to do that just at the moment. It's not a big enough graphic. I apologize for that.
No problem.
The point we're trying to illustrate there is the gap. And on the picture, the photograph, which I don't know if you're seeing clearly enough, again, you can see reality. That's actually a helicopter view of Toronto City out along the LRT route, the metro route, which is Yonge Street. And you can see the high-rise downtown, then at Finch. Then there's flat land where it's all residential, very low-level land. And then at Richmond, again, it goes high-rise again. The point being, if that proposed station does get built out, what's going to happen is the economic development around that point will just go vertical. You're going to get a lot more economic development around there. And that tends to be, that happens everywhere in the world, that this is, you apply that type of infrastructure. And we've got examples of, all over the world where huge economic growth has occurred around transit lines. The trick, of course, is now to capture that for the city or the state that's investing in this infrastructure and share the windfall back with, in effect, the taxpayer, rather than it simply going to the property developer who makes off with 100% of the value, having done really very little at all to increase that value if he's simply the landowner who's selling to a builder. So I thought I'd just illustrate that for you. Okay. I'll work out how to unshare.
All right. Well, you're working on that, Roy. Is there any other questions from the group by chance? Well, thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Roy, for your time today and sharing this new methodology, if you will, for infrastructure finance. I'm going to move on to item number 6.
Okay,
and that's
thank you.
Thank you. Dave Johnson, Deputy General Manager of Operations for Las Vegas Valley Water District, to give us an update on what's going on with water in Southern Nevada. I think many of you have seen the national and local articles about a mega drought and the concerns about water resources in Lake Mead, what that means for our community, what's it mean, in the short term and the long term. So we felt that having Dave give us an update, at this juncture would be a pretty good idea. So Dave, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Chris, for the opportunity. And I've got a presentation today that I think you have received. Let me see if I do this the right way. Okay. Did that come up properly? Yes? Okay, good. Again, my name's Dave Johnson. I'm the Deputy General Manager of Operations for the Las Vegas Valley Water District and the Southern Nevada Water Authority. And I appreciate the opportunity to be able to share with you a little bit about what's going on with respect to water in Southern Nevada. Responsibilities for Southern Nevada Water Authority. And I'm going to commingle the two organizations quite a bit in this presentation because some things are definitely water authority or regional topics, and some are very much associated with what we're doing at the Las Vegas Valley Water District. So responsibilities from the Southern Nevada Water Authority, obviously our conservation, you've seen a lot of those efforts in the recent years, water supply planning, water quality, infrastructure, and stewardship. And that basically makes up the suite of what SNWA does. We provide water to 7 out of 10 Nevadans, both in the form of residential service and businesses. I think that's important to know in context of the state. But most of our resource that we provide comes from the Colorado River. We're extremely dependent on Colorado River water. Only 10% of our resource comes from pumped water from the aquifer that sits below the Las Vegas Valley. We've been, as Chris mentioned, in drought for over 20 years now, and this gives you a perspective of where we are right now. This basically is showing the 7 basin states that all have a either by locale or by diversion have reliance upon the Colorado River. And you can see here with this intensity graphic here, we're in a pretty significant drought. In fact, the D4 designation is exceptional drought. Unfortunately, this graphic hasn't changed a whole lot in recent years. And kind of the more important graphic is this next one, which shows as basically a predictor of the future. And you can see basically all of the desert Southwest, and candidly much of the West, is either in a persistent drought or a drought that is likely to develop. Very few areas, as you can see, are not in that situation. So Southern Nevada finds itself in continuing drought as we look forward. This graphic, specifically as we bring it back to Lake Mead, and this shows a little bit strange in this presentation, but basically we're very concerned about lake levels in Lake Mead, obviously, and this graphic gives you year by year what the probability of reaching various elevations in Lake Mead actually is. And so you can see, especially considering this particular water year, which is the second worst in the last 25 years from influence as it relates to coming into Lake Powell, we're looking at some pretty significant reductions in level in Lake Mead. The probabilities are high that we will certainly get into our first location of shortage or elevation of shortage, which is 1075, probably within 2 years from now, certainly, maybe next year. Elevation 1050, you can see what the probabilities are in 1025. And there's specific actions that need to be taken associated with each one of those elevation triggers, which I'll talk about in a little bit. I wanted to segue into, so what have we been doing about it? What has SNWA been doing thus far about the response to these situations? First is infrastructure. We, as you may remember, the third intake and the pumping station have been completed, and that really gives us quite a bit of surety. In fact, more surety than anybody else on the Colorado River of being able to access the resource that we have available to us. Currently, if you were to look at this, the intake right now, the level of Lake Mead is above intake 1, shown in this graphic. If we had not put in intake 3 and the low lake level pumping station, the associated pumping station, that elevation going down below intake 1 at elevation 1050, we would have been reliant upon 1 pumping station. If that elevation continued to go down below 1,000, then the second intake would have been out of service. And so this infrastructure, which was about $1.3 billion worth of infrastructure, was critically important, not only to meet those potential scenarios, but to shore us up for the future. Now, it's really important to know this fact: dead pool for Lake Mead, which means that's the lowest level at which that water can be released through Hoover Dam, is at 895, and our elevation of our intake is at 875. So even if the Lake Mead's level were to go down to a place where we can no longer release it through Hoover Dam down to Southern California, Mexico, Arizona, we'd still be able to pump resource into the Las Vegas Valley. So it's really a great insurance policy from an access standpoint. Another facet is our resource planning. We do a 50-year resource plan, which is updated annually. And it's basically, this is just for example purposes. You can see on the left, the graphic, it shows projected demands. We do a scenario-based approach, actually multiple scenario-based approach, which looks at our upper demands, which consider usage at upper demands and population growth at upper demands and at lower demands. And you can see another scenario that we factor into each of our scenarios, which is our upper demand with additional conservation. So a lot of this discussion that I'm going to have today with you is about conservation and the kinds of things that we need to do and how we need to develop sustainably in the valley. But that factors in some of that, how we can bend that curve down and make our resource last longer. Over on the right-hand side, we also look at the hydrologic scenarios. And as you can see from 1905 all the way to current day, unfortunately, the trend has gone in a downward fashion as to the water that's available to us and on the Colorado River. And you can see on the bottom, we've just tried to bracket some time frames where we had average water supply. And what average really means is average was what was used in the original Colorado Compact to determine the allocations that went to each of the states. And for many of these years, we have been in situations that have been less than average. And so when you look at the way the water was allocated and you look at the amount of water that we have received in the 1900s, we find ourselves overall in a deficit. One promising project that we are working on is a agreement that we recently put together with the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. It essentially is a regional recycling project where they are going to use treated wastewater and then re-inject that back into various areas in the Southern California area. You can see a graphic here which shows the different locations they're contemplating doing this. From a water reclaim or a water recycle perspective, this is very common. This is just a very large scale project. And how it applies to us is that we have the opportunity to financially participate in this project and in return receive the share of water that would be equivalent to that financial participation that we can draw out of Lake Mead. So to take some of their Colorado River allocation and draw it out of Lake Mead for use in our community for the financial participation in this project. It's the first time that this kind of approach has been taken, and there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. But in our recent capital program, the board authorized that we move forward with this project, and so we have considerable funding to be able to move forward with this approach. So while we are in the face of drought and we're still looking for solutions to try to add to our overall resource portfolio, we're hoping and expecting that somewhere between 20 and 30,000 acre feet may be available as a result of this, which would be approximately 10% increase in our overall water portfolio. We also have available to us water banking arrangements in Lake Mead, and currently, right now, we have approximately 8 years at the current consumptive use worth of water that is for Southern Nevada that is banked in Lake Mead. So as our community continues to grow and we deal with how we conserve against that, we do have some water, basically 8 full years worth of water in Lake Mead that we can use. So that's very, very valuable to us. On the conservation front, to this point, this graphic is one we use often just to give some perspective. Our community has done a fantastic job in responding to this drought situation and conserving. Since 2002, our population has increased by 52%. At the same time, our per capita or per person water use has gone down 47%. And our overall Colorado River consumption during that same period of time has gone down 23%. So while adding 50% increase in people to the valley, we've been able to reduce overall water consumption, which is a credit to people, businesses, efforts that have been taken by Southern Nevada. If you sit and actually take a minute to kind of contextualize what that means, it's really a very monumental lift to be able to accomplish that. And we're going to have to continue to leverage that in how we move forward. What that equates to in terms of what our kind of hallmark program is, which is our Water Smart Landscapes program, is that we have, my favorite of these different graphics is kind of the one that shows the picture of the earth. We've removed enough turf in southern Nevada to take an 18-inch wide swath of turf all the way around the world. That's how much grass that we have removed here in southern Nevada. And you can see the corresponding amount of water that we've saved. So again, just a kudo to the efforts that have already occurred. Now, with all that said, we need to continue to do that and more moving forward. So given the drought situation, given the growth that we've experienced, this graph here shows that unfortunately our water use is trending in the wrong direction. You can see 2018, 2019, and then 2020. As growth has occurred, and as one thing that's occurred too is as people change out in southern Nevada and they forget or they were never educated on the fact that we live in a desert, and some of the initial conservation education efforts that we did, we're finding that consumptive use is increasing. And just to put it in perspective, if you look at the 255,800 acre feet consumptive use, our allocation moving into the future will likely be about 270,000 acre feet. If you remember, 300,000 acre feet is what we are entitled to as part of the compact, but with the agreements that we've entered in to over time, the drought contingency plan, which is the DCP here, and also shortage, which were in the interim surplus guidelines, as Lake Mead's level lower, have to take a haircut from that 300,000. So we're not comparing to 300,000 in these drought situations that are extreme. We're comparing to numbers that are lesser. Now we're still well within the 270,000 that would be available to us, but it is something that has drawn our attention pretty significantly, and we need to respond to. Really, it's not a matter of whether our community is going to grow, because we know that it is. It's how our community grows. And again, I go back to this graphic here just as an example. On the left, you see population of 2.3 million, and that's a number. We use SEBR numbers here. And on the right-hand side, this is the future projection. It could be anywhere between what we're saying is 3.2 million or 4 million in 2071. And again, we're looking at a 50-year resource planning horizon. And so really, what I would draw your attention to is that this additional conservation and these efforts that we're really embarking on are hopefully going to be able to flatten that curve for water demand as we move forward. We're also facing climate issues, right? Climate change is a factor due to warmer temperatures, lower precipitation. We see, antecedent soil conditions are much drier than what they have been before in the Colorado River Basin. And so, and also aging infrastructure. And that relates primarily to leakage rates that we have, because consumptive use, any drop of water that leaks into the ground is lost as to our availability to provide it to customers. So you have those pressures that are driving in the wrong direction, and you have the things that we can potentially do from an adaptive management standpoint, which I'm going to talk about in the rest of this presentation here, that are going to help to mitigate that and drive that down. You see in the middle here 105 gallon per capita per day as a conservation goal. This is a goal that was recently adopted by our board, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but basically that's going to be a really important number and metric for us to point to as we move forward. So last fall, as I mentioned, our board of directors approved these recommendations, primarily associated with how we can provide additional conservation. And one of those was the funding that we have available to us to continue to reduce non-functional turf. Now, non-functional turf is going to be a big topic of conversation here in Southern Nevada for a period of time. We have AB 356 that we are hoping gets approved very soon and gets signed into law that basically eliminates non-functional turf over a period of time. Non-functional turf is defined as anything that the only time, this is a general description, that we've got specific descriptions, but if the only time that you're going onto that turf is to mow it, then it's probably not necessary in a desert in Southern Nevada. And so we've got better definitions for that. And we have also funds to be able to assist with respect to the removal of that. But that's going to be a big push. Also, limitations associated with cool season turf. That's going to be another aspect. We are working on implementing smart controllers. So your irrigation controller that you have in your house or your business, using smart controller technology that takes into account what the weather conditions are and rain, et cetera. Advanced metering infrastructure. This is something that the city of North Las Vegas, the city of Henderson, and the Las Vegas Valley Water District are all doing in various phases. But this is putting metering infrastructure, basically a smart meter that allows for us to be able to get data in real time, essentially, for what each residence is using and bring that back into the utility and then be able to use that information. It's going to be very, very valuable for people to get a better perspective of actually how they're using water in comparison to others, and in accordance with standards, et cetera. So that's going to be something that we're doing. And that's no different technology really than what, for instance, NV Energy is doing right now with respect to providing information. One of the big areas that we have not put as much emphasis on yet as we have wanted to is with respect to evaporative cooling. We have a lot of evaporative cooling in Southern Nevada, and if you think about it, by nature you're just consumptively using quite a bit of water to provide that cooling. So we're going to be working on programmatic activity to look and see if we can reduce that in the valley. And a large water users policy. We're going to be taking a look at are there opportunities for us to evaluate the kinds of businesses that are looking to come into Southern Nevada and ensure that they're kind of that the consumptive use in those businesses may be appropriate for our location. We also are this graphic was put in place to show basically how effective that development codes can be. As you can see here, the blue line are homes that were constructed before 1992. The green is 92 to 2002, and then the gray is after 2002. And if just by looking at the difference there, we made a development code that prohibited turf in front yards and limited the available turf capacity in backyards to 50%. And so as a result of that, we've had very beneficial outcome associated with water use based on the time frame in which those homes were developed. And so much more water efficient situations on those newer homes. So getting a little closer to the topic that we're talking about here is this is a really important graphic for you to understand as it relates to Southern Nevada and what we call our return flow credit methodology. So I'm going to use the arrow here. We pull water in from Lake Mead, we treat that water, and that water then goes one of two places, indoor use or outdoor use. If the water gets used indoors, it then goes back to a wastewater treatment plant and then goes back out to Lake Mead. And so this loop that you see here actually does not reduce from our allocation on the Colorado River. Hypothetically, if we didn't have any outdoor use, which we call consumptive use, then we would be able to grow infinitely, okay? Our charge and our concern and the issue we face is outdoor water use, because that is water that only has the opportunity to be used one time and does not go back into Lake Mead. All right, and the reason that's important is because as we start to talk about development, and we start to talk about development outside the valley, any of the water that we take, the Colorado River water that we take outside the valley, we absolutely have to treat that as though it was how we handle water in the valley. So for instance, as we've been talking about future development down to Ivanpah, we've had a lot of conversation about the need for us to return that water back to the valley, that wastewater back to the valley, so that we can get the full efficiency of that water. So as we're talking about this, and from a development perspective, it's going to be really important for us to look at what type of development it is, what kind of consumptive use it is, and for infrastructure, not only to bring water to those locations, but to return that wastewater back to the valley. Otherwise, we're just adding additional consumptive use for every project that we put in. One of the, I talked about non-functional turf and what the definition is here. If you can think about it, you think about medians, roundabouts. We're not talking about parks that kids play in. We're not talking about, those areas that are used frequently. We're talking about non-functional turf that's really aesthetic use only, okay? And we say there in this slide, walk down only by landscapers. There's a lot of this in the valley that really doesn't have a functional benefit for that use. And so that's what we're focused on. And there's a lot of that that's still available. This non-functional turf graph that you can see here, this is what we calculate that's still available to us. So we've got about 1,100 in the residential sector. We've got about 1,500 in the multifamily aspect, and you can see the other slices of this pie. The golf courses have done really a fantastic job of trying to limit the amount of turf. We've used all kinds of innovative solutions with the golf courses. We've put monitors on golfers to see where they actually play and where they don't play, and golf courses have removed turf where they get a very low volume of actual play that occurs. A lot of things have been done in that area, but there's still quite a bit of availability here, as you can see. And the water savings, I mean, we're talking about 37,400 acre feet. That's a considerable amount of water savings. And so this is something that we are going to be working very hard on. Another thing we don't usually think about in Southern Nevada all that frequently are the amount of septic tanks. Here you can see there's over 1,800 septic tanks that exist in Southern Nevada. And every one of those septic tanks is consumptive use, because that water is not returned back into the system and then back to Lake Mead. It flows into the aquifer over time. And so we're working on a conversion program to incentivize people to be able to go off of septic and convert into the overall septic system. Many of the people that have septic have a sewer system that's reasonably close to them. Development, maybe when they developed their house, there was not the infrastructure that was close by. They put a septic in. Now the infrastructure is a whole lot closer in many of these developments. And so if it's an incentivized program, we're looking at being able to offer that. Artificial turf incentive, basically looking at areas where we could put artificial turf in instead of in functional recreation areas. And I already talked about the large water user policy, but these are some of the things that we're looking at, and candidly, some of the decisions that I think we're going to have to make in Southern Nevada as we continue to grow. So we've tried to be very programmatic associated with and data oriented associated with what each of these initiatives may result in. And so each of these lines represents an amount of saving, a GPCD saving, to go from where we are now down to our goal of 105 GPCD by 2035. And so you can see all of these different initiatives here, and I don't want to waste your time on too many of the details here, but You can see the measures I've talked about associated with warm season turf, our large user policy, cooling efficiency that we talked about, and some of these are associated with compliance. Some of these are associated with education. Asset management relates to leakage. So again, this is our plan for how we intend to get to that GPCD goal by 2035. So the main themes here are convert non-functional turf, make new development as efficient as possible. And again, as we talk about new development, ensuring that part of that efficiency is ensuring that the wastewater is returned from those situations that are outside of the Las Vegas Valley. If we're exporting, we need to make sure we do that. Make it as efficient as possible. So take a look at, are there opportunities, for instance, in cooling? Can we do air cooling as opposed to water cooled type situations? Are there other opportunities as well? As I mentioned, all wastewater returned to Lake Mead, and then forge agreements with our Colorado River partners. That's a shout out to the fact that our agreements end in 2026, and we are currently right now working on additional agreements to replace all of the agreements that we have moving forward, so that we can all cooperate to our best advantage and be able to get our best use for Colorado River water. I know that was a whole lot, and I'm happy to try to answer any questions that you may have. Let's see if I do this right. Did I shut that down properly?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm kind of a novice at this, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. I know that was kind of information rich, but I thought it'd be better, especially because you have the deck. You can take that, and if you have any questions as you kind of move forward, you feel free to reach out to me or any of the team here, and we can help give you that information.
Thanks, Dave. Is there any questions from the working group?
Hey, Chris, can I ask a question?
Please.
Dave, wonderful presentation. Thank you. SNWA has done great things to conserve water, and while we're still growing, do you think that at some point we'll reach our carrying capacity here in Las Vegas in terms of growth?
That is a great question, Kamud. I hope not while I'm in this chair. I see a few laughs there. You know, it all depends, candidly, because there are still a tremendous amount of opportunities out there to be able to conserve and to be more efficient. For instance, as we have embarked on this whole evaporative cooling component, if you look at what could be a carrot of 15 to 20,000 acre feet worth of water that's used per year, that's a significant amount. If we start to get into reducing the turf that I mentioned, that is a significant amount. So it's possible, but what I would say is that how we develop, how we grow, and how we adapt is really going to be the main focus here. I don't think anybody could ever tell you if or when that tipping point may occur, but I do know that because of the way we're structured and the way that we have the return flow credit methodology, that we have basically our destiny in our own hands here, really.
Understand. Thanks, Dave.
Hey, Dave, you mentioned in terms of new companies coming into the region and working with them. Can you give a little bit of perspective of what that looks like? We have a lot of economic development folks on the working group here and representing different jurisdictions, as you know. So can you give us a little bit of thought on how that might look?
Yeah, basically what happens informally now is when larger companies or larger water use companies want to relocate or to build in Southern Nevada, we end up getting a phone call from either GoEd or LVGEA or or others to talk about that particular use. Hey, does this make sense? Would we be able to provide this much water? Is this the right stop for this company in Southern Nevada? And we want to kind of work together and partner to kind of formalize that a little bit more, so that we can start to look at, hey, if we have a bottling company that comes in that is going to employ 5 people, but consume 2,000 acre feet per year, is that really are we really the place for that company to come? And we're not necessarily the decider of that. I think what we want to do is formalize the seat at the table associated with evaluating those, because there's a lot of interest from a lot of different parties, and in some cases we have the capability of being able to provide expertise in understanding for them to understand what the actual situation is here. Because if you're a company from the Midwest or from the East Coast that's looking to relocate to Southern Nevada, they may not have the water perspective for our locale that they need, and we may be able to even say, hey, look, if this is what you're planning to do, could you do it in this fashion and considerably reduce their water footprint? Not necessarily turn away, but give them information either to make a decision or to look towards in their evaluation how they might structure their facilities to be more water efficient given our situation. So that's what we're really after. We believe that there is some saving there, because we've had circumstances where companies have come in without knowing that and put in, Midwest or East Coast technologies essentially that were higher in consumptive use than really what they could have been.
Thanks for that. Do we have any other questions from the working group? All right, just scrolling through here to make sure I'm missing one. Great, thank you, Dave. I appreciate that. That was extremely informative. And the slides are up on the website. So if you go to the working group link off of the GoEd website, you'll have access to both the slides that David presented, as well as the accompanying white paper for the discussion during the panel portion of our agenda today. So moving on to item number 7, working group member comments. Are there any general comments from working group members? Okay, seeing none. Moving on to item number 8, introduction of agenda items scheduled for a June meeting. Are there any suggestions for the June meeting in terms of the agenda?
Hey, Chris, this is Shawnee.
Hey, Shawnee.
Maybe for June, maybe a quick recap of maybe bills that impact this infrastructure group.
Great
bills
idea.
that actually passed the legislature that may have an impact on what we're focused on.
Absolutely, great idea. Thank you for that. Any others? And if just to remind the group, we had some suggestions out of the last 2 meetings as well. We've got those noted. So what we'll do is we'll work up a draft, taking in those recommendations in mind, as well as partnering with some of the organizations that had made those recommendations to ensure that we have speaker availability and that we hit on the topics that were requested. And certainly if there's, after the meeting or into next week, if you think of anything, don't hesitate to reach out to Jeanette or myself as we have a little bit of time in structuring that agenda. June meeting, and then subsequently the July meeting is our last meeting. We will have John Restrepo come in again and give an update on some of the interviews that have been conducted, as well as the information gleaned from these meetings. If you remember, we did a brief recap on the first 2 meetings previously. We'll round out in July with a more comprehensive summary of everything at that time. So at this time, I'll move on to item number 9, and that's public comment. Jeanette, would you like to facilitate?
Yes, of course. Does anyone wish to give public comment at this time? You'll be limited to 3 minutes. Okay. All right, Chris, no public comment at this time.
Thanks, Jeanette. Appreciate that. Number 10, adjournment. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll move to adjourn. Bill Orange.
Thank you, Bill.
Christina, seconds.
Thank you, Christina. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Hi.
All right. Thanks again, everybody. I really appreciate your time today, and we'll be in contact with you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.